So we're talking about the back of the book again.
Nice.
And you're like, I told you before, like, I know when we did the podcast episode, it was kind of shitty of me to throw that at the end where it was like a gotcha, like slapping everything down. I have nothing like that this time. You're basically the expert. I haven't even really like dove into this very much. So I'm honestly just going to have a bunch of questions for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of thought of some things too, just because I kind of want to ask some questions of you.
Sure.
Just so that we can have like a dialogue of the different perspectives and kind of why. Because you kind of represent, I would say, just your typical average user within the community, right? Like you have your certain beliefs and they're based on certain things. And, you know, I have my beliefs for why I believe what I believe. And I think it's just good to have like a conversation about it.
Yeah.
And just see if you can see the, like kind of the other side. I mean, honestly, like it's pretty easy to see your side. Like Byron said this, it's in the book, it says this. And so.
Well, it's also easy to see your side because like, it feels like even given what Byron said and even given what the book says, because we don't understand, if you're on my side, because we don't completely understand the verses and the paintings, we're left with huge gaps of information. And then we have 150 pages in the back of the book that could fill those gaps. Does that make sense? So it's easy to see where other people are coming from as well.
Yeah, for me, what it comes down to is like when I started looking at the back, you know, and I had already had a few locations that I was kind of set on. And as my theory started to progress, like I started changing theories based on what I found in the back because it was compelling.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I hear sometimes a lot of people will say like the back of the book can't lead you anywhere. Like I kind of tend to disagree with that because in a lot of cases it has led me to other places. Like a lot of the places that I thought for each city originally, I don't believe that anymore. And for the most part, I don't believe, like I'm good with all the cities, but I'm pretty much in different parks compared to like the majority of searchers. Like I'm not in your typical parks. And for me, that's why I kind of think things haven't been solved as much because we're just looking in the wrong places. But that's just my opinion. We're in the right cities.
It's, you know, we were looking in the wrong place in Boston. Brian was looking in the wrong place in Cleveland. I think the only people that started out looking in the right place was Rob.
Yeah. And I came in maybe like, when was Boston found? Like in what month? Do you remember? I came in like August of whatever that year was. So it was like found in like October, November, something like that. I can't remember, but I never even got to the Boston puzzle. And then all of a sudden it was solved. And so I never got a chance to really dig into it and have any of my own theories. I've just basically looked at it in hindsight and just tried to figure out, you know, deconstructing it, you know, with that reverse process, just to try to see all the things that, you know, we could have known just to help with the other puzzles. And that's kind of how I operate now.
Was there anything in Boston that really helped? I mean, that was specific?
For me, like I think I wouldn't say that there's a map in the image, but I would say there are things in the image that you can use to map, which I don't know if that makes sense exactly, but I mean, I've posted some of these things.
Yeah.
Like I think relationships between objects in the image, where they are relative to each other within a painting, could possibly be where they are relative to each other on a map, for example. And so I'll try to use that to say like, okay, like for the example, the Boston Pops, right? They play at the Symphony Hall. And so I look at that and where is it relative to the jewel and lining it up with some other things, which I posted just the other day. I put out my one video that kind of explains everything. But I just, you know, I think there are ways to map to the important places like in the puzzle. And they're self-confirming in my opinion. Like once you do it and you see where you end up, you're like, oh, that makes sense because the Old North Church is in the verse, you know?
Okay. I think I understand.
Like I said, I mean, I'll try to link the video before, but that I've made. It's been up for a while now. I'm sure a lot of people have checked it out. Not everyone might agree with it, but I mean, I feel pretty confident that that's something that they were trying to do. And so I've used some of those mapping techniques and some of the other puzzles. And that's kind of why I feel like I have all the parks in the right spot. But pinpointing it is obviously pretty difficult. I can attest to that. I dug in San Francisco and came up empty. So
Did you do you, well, I guess if are you like, when you dug in San Francisco, did that take the park away from you, or do you just like, I'm, a foot off, or I just don't know?
I mean, I still think I'm in the right spot, like the right
Okay.
location, but there's, I mean, the end of the San Francisco verse is vague, man. Like, what does giant pole and giant step really mean?
Yeah.
And there's different, you look in a dictionary, you look up some of these words, what they could mean, and with some of the things that I found, like at that location, and there's multiple meanings for the word that could fit. And so I just went with what I thought was the best based on some image matches that I had, based on what the verse said. And I made my best logical guess, and it was wrong.
Yeah.
So, and actually, I dug two holes. So, um,
They're pretty
I
good
mean, I
about
don't,
letting you do that.
yeah, I mean, he was cool. I kind of pushed the envelope a little bit on that, but whatever. Little slap on the wrist, no big deal. But regardless, like I ruled out two spots. So
Yeah. So, I mean, you were talking about the last part of the San Francisco image being vague, and I guess from my perspective, it's only vague because we don't understand it yet, right? Like in Boston, "feel at
sure.
home" is the vaguest line I've ever heard. But when we understand it, we're like, oh yeah, okay, that's dumb. Um, what? So you were, just for full disclosure, I sent you the back of the book manuscript a couple of weeks before everybody else had it, right?
Right.
And you were able to tear through it. Is there anything in there? Is there anything in the manuscript that sort of changed your mind about the way you were applying any of the clues you found from the back of the book? Does that make sense?
No, yeah, it does. I don't think so. It's it's raised some interesting questions for me because like you have to think about it like is if there was something in there in the rough draft that they then took out. Okay, why did they take that out? Because I'm like on all these things, whether it's the manuscript or the actual book itself, like I'm constantly asking why. Why did they do it like this? And
Mm,
that's part of the reason why I kind of think there's things in the book, like all throughout the book, the front, the back, everything.
yeah,
So I'm always asking why. So that was one of the first questions, like, because I went through every single page and compared everything to the what's in the book. And a lot of it's just like, rough draft cleanup, right? Just editing so that you're just making it sound a little cleaner. Nothing really major, just some typical editing stuff. But then there's other things where it's like they obviously had an idea here because they're using a very specific reference. And then that reference was removed. And why did they remove it? Was it because in my mind, I look at everything as like, okay, that's like a specific reference that you could research and figure something out from. So did they remove it because it didn't fit with whatever they were trying to convey? Or what did they have something better? And I just kind of look at the comparison. Okay, they took this out and then they added this in. Why? And so is it more important to kind of focus on what was removed, or is it more important to focus on what's not there in the first draft that was then added later to go into the book? Because to me, that speaks a lot about kind of where they were at their mindset when they were writing
yeah.
this thing. And like I said, I always go back to why. Why did they include this? Why was this reference so important that they had to have it in the book?
Well, doesn't that essentially make your job as a solver using the back of the book immensely more difficult? Right? Like if we take the fact of knowing when the casks were made and knowing that this was written before the casks were made, then we think to ourselves, okay, Byron went to bury the casks after the back of the book was created. If there were clues in the back of the book pointing to a specific location, and maybe for some reason Byron couldn't bury it there, he had to switch locations, so they had to change shit in the back of the book. So now you're looking at edits in the back of the book for a location that's no longer valid, right?
Sure.
Or I mean, there's once you create that option, it just makes things so much more difficult for you.
Well, I mean, I kind of research everything anyways. like as I read through any of the fairies, if it's just like your window dressing type text that's not really saying anything that you can, it's just random stuff, right? Just your typical Mad Magazine stuff. Like I'm
Right.
not even worrying about that. But when you get to a specific reference that you can actually look up and try to understand, like, okay, what's the context of this reference? Because I mean, unless you were there in 82, like you might not get it fully. Like what are they getting at here? It might be a reference from the 70s that at that time might have still been kind of in the public thought of pop culture, that kind of stuff, but now it's long gone, so you don't really get it. I just research all that stuff and just try to get an idea of what it was like then and what that could have meant. But I mean, I don't know. I kind of feel like I came on right when you were talking about the how we use the back of the book.
Hmm.
So maybe I'll ask you a question, like,
Sure.
so why do you think they would include references to things that don't seem to be anything um like, why use a play on words for something that's actually like a piece of music or a book or a movie? Does that make
Can you
sense? Like, why put that in there?
can you give me an example?
Oh, there's lots of them. Like, for example, in the Scrububus, right? You look at the picture of her
Uh-huh.
come popping out of the washing machine. It mentions she's mother's little helper. Well, I mean, it's capitalized, right? So I looked that up, and that's a Rolling Stone song. Okay, and so
But
mother's
it's also it's a laundry detergent jingle. It's a laundry detergent jingle from the 80s or from the 70s. Oh God, what detergent is it? It's
so it might be.
mommy's
There's a
little
bunch of
helper.
them. Yeah, there's a
Yeah,
bunch of them listed in the actual text, right? So it could be one of those.
yeah.
But then also it's like, oh wow, that's like a Rolling Stone song. And what's it about? It's about tranquilizers. And so when I see things like that, I just file it away. And I just happen to be at Tranquility Park, so I'm looking at things like that, like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Um, then when you find like two or three other references in the back of the book that all refer to tranquilizers, that's when I, like you mentioned before, like, is there a pattern back there? I start looking for patterns like that, like repeat usage of things,
Yeah.
repeat uses of ideas, concepts, things like that, to kind of solidify, like, okay, maybe this is what they were trying to get us to pay attention to.
I mean, that kind of makes sense because it's basically what people are doing with the front of the book now too. Like Chris and John's thing where they take the month and the gem and all of this and they create the patterns that give them the park. So like in San Francisco, they say the painting and the verse is mainly about things coming together and unity and yin yang, and that ends up
Sure.
in Union Square. It's a pattern of themes that ends up in one spot. So you're basically using it the same way.
Yeah, and I'll say right now, like that theme that they talked about, I totally agree with. I'm just at a different spot. So, I mean, everybody has their interpretation of what it actually means, right?
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I'm coughing.
It's all good.
Yeah, I mean we're all at different spots, so it's fine. One
And
of us will be
that's kind of how I feel. I mean, everybody's using the verse and the image and coming to different spots. Well, if you're trying to use the back of the book, like you're going to come to a different spot just the same way, right? Like, I don't see it as really anything different. There's just a lot more information there that you're going to have to sift through and try to understand what they were trying to get you to think.